Hello, and welcome back to the Green Living Now podcast. I'm your host, Amy Tedisco, and I'm here to guide you into a deep dive into green living and holistic health. Together, we will discover how to avoid illness by reducing and eliminating the toxins in your food, your home, and your life, and embracing holistic health strategies so that you can thrive in your mind, your body, and your soul. Today is episode 7 with my special guest, Dr. Mort Orman, the leading anger elimination expert. Today, we're talking about a topic that impacts all of us, unwanted anger. Typically, experts only know how to tell you to manage anger. But this guy, Dr. Mort Orman, who I'm talking with today, a physician, turned his deepest challenges into a groundbreaking approach on how to actually eliminate anger. His journey began in the high stress days of medical school, where he was a very angry 20 or 30 something young man. And he figured out that the anger management skills just didn't cut it. So he cracked the code by using himself as an experiment on how to tackle and eliminate those sneaky triggers and how the brain works to keep us angry. It is a life-changing experience for him, and he's teaching other people how to do it. And you will learn a whole bunch of insights from him today in this fascinating conversation. I think of unwanted anger as yet another toxin that we want to eliminate from our lives because it can cause health, relationship, career problems, you name it. So let's get to it. Welcome, Dr. Mort Orman, leading anger elimination expert.
That's me.
Did I get
That's
that right?
me.
Perfect.
Yeah, nice
All
to be
right.
here. Nice to be here.
Oh, lovely to have you. My first question is, how did you get into this topic? Why is this a passion for you?
Well, as you know, I'm a physician. As I went through medical training, medical school, 3 years of internship and residency, I started to develop a lot of anger problems for myself. And then I opened up my practice after I finished all that and started taking care of patients, and all kinds of things would come up, and I just had a short fuse. I was just a very angry young guy. And I tried all the standard stuff to, quote, manage my anger, but very little of it helped. If it helped, it didn't help for very long because I would wake up the next day, I'd still be the same angry person.
Right.
I would get angry at my patients sometimes. I would get angry at friends. All my relationships with girlfriends ended one right after another, partly due to the anger.
Yeah.
I had these problems that I couldn't figure out. I was used to succeeding at solving any problem I put my mind to. And
Oh,
I just
interesting.
could not stop myself from getting angry. I could not
Yeah.
control my anger. I had anxiety issues too. And then I'm taking care of patients.
Right.
As a doctor, you notice the angry people from the not so angry people pretty easily. And then you see what happens over time.
Yeah.
Most people don't get that perspective that we get. And you see that the angry people have a lot more health problems. They have a lot more divorces. They have a lot more addictions that they
Right.
develop. The businesses fall apart. Business deals, partnerships fall apart. And they have more heart disease and all kinds of stuff. So I'm sitting there as a young guy with my own anger issues.
Right.
I'm noticing what anger does to people. All right. And I'm trying to solve the anger and nothing's working. And I'm
Right.
thinking, I got to figure this out before something bad like this happens to me. So
Yeah.
long and short of it is that got me into personal development work. I did that for a couple of years. And I started to gain some insights that I hadn't had before about what was
Okay.
really going on when I was experiencing not just anger, but other emotions as well, but particularly anger, what was really going on, which I hadn't really been taught in all my medical training. And I dabbled in some psychology after that, hadn't been taught it
Yeah.
there. Fortunately, I was able to get some insights into what was going on that enabled me to have this huge breakthrough in my ability to not just control anger, but actually get rid of it. Stop being an angry person. I went from
Yeah.
being a very angry guy to the last 40 years, I've had very little anger in my life. And if I do get angry now, I know exactly where it's coming from. I know exactly how to step in and make it go away. So I don't have lingering anger. I don't have anger that lasts for days or weeks or years. If I do get angry, maybe it lasts 15 minutes and then I can figure out what's going on.
Right.
I've taught a lot of people how to do that over the last 40 years. And a lot of people don't believe that's possible. A lot of people think they're stuck with their anger or that it's just
Right.
part of their personality. Some people think it's part of being human, that you got to have
Right.
anger to be a fully flushed out human being. Well, you don't. You don't.
So that leads me to a question. Do you feel like anger is not needed, or are there times when anger can serve you well? I'm thinking about as a woman growing up in New York City, there are a lot of crazy men on the street.
Well, New York City.
Yeah, right. So if I didn't act out with some anger, I probably would have been taken advantage of or hurt in certain ways.
Yeah.
I guess what I'm thinking is there's certain places where anger is appropriate, but if it's ruling your life or it's interfering with your life, that's when it becomes a problem. Or how would you?
Yeah, I think that there's like two basic categories of anger. There's unwanted anger,
Right,
and then there's wanted anger, anger that's serving a purpose.
right.
Okay.
Okay, that's
So
good.
defining a boundary, protecting yourself, standing up for yourself, letting people know that certain things are not okay,
Right.
that they're
Right.
doing.
So setting boundaries,
Yeah. Yeah.
sometimes
So
that has to be done in a more full way.
in managing people, if you have kids,
Yeah.
sometimes anger is appropriate.
Yeah.
If you're a coach of an athletic team, sometimes you need to get angry to get your point across that the team
Right.
is not functioning at the highest level that you know they can. Sometimes when I'm arguing with a customer service rep, even though I'm not really angry, I will pretend to be angry because it's effective.
Oh, that's
Gets
interesting.
you to the supervisor, tries to figure out a way to solve the problem. And there are times when anger is appropriate, but I would say 85, 90% of the time when we get angry, it's not productive anger. It's potentially harmful anger. It can affect our
Mm,
health. It can damage our relationships. It can get us into legal trouble,
hmm.
cause us to lose our job. There's
Right.
all kinds of things, and it's the vast majority of the anger that we experience.
Yeah.
I would put in that category, if you really are honestly looking at it, it's unhealthy, unwanted anger, and you really should want to get rid of that.
Right. And so, for the purposes of this Green Living Now podcast, that this topic of anger can be looked at as sort of an unwanted toxin that we can get rid of,
Well, the types of anger that aren't useful,
the non-productive.
the non-productive type,
Yeah.
are toxic by definition. I mean, they're harmful. Look how many marriages have been ruined,
Yes,
by people not understanding how to control their anger, not understanding where it's coming from
for
within
sure.
themselves, so they can't get their hands on the controls. And it
Yeah.
can destroy a relationship. Look how many kids get estranged from their parents over
Yes,
fights and arguments and things like
absolutely.
that. People get their health damaged, their careers damaged.
Right.
It is truly toxic.
So I think it's obvious when somebody is angry and lashing out or is screaming or is verbally abusive or hopefully not physically, but that happens too, as we know.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you look at passive aggressive type of anger?
I look at it like this. How does anger get generated inside a human being?
Right.
Any form. And there's a whole spectrum of anger. So you can go from very minor, little irritations, little
Yeah.
annoyances, impatience from standing in line, that kind of stuff,
Right.
or in traffic, all the way over to full-blown road rage, violence,
Yeah.
striking out, damaging other people or their property in anger.
Right.
So,
Right.
and anything in between. So you got
Right.
this whole spectrum of anger, and it's all generated in the same way. It gets expressed differently, it gets felt
Right.
differently, and it
Right.
has different magnitudes. There's DEFCON 3 or whatever.
Ballistic nuclear weapon
Yeah,
level.
yeah, yeah. So it gets generated inside of us.
Right.
And then the question becomes, what do we do with it? How,
Right.
do we express it? If we do, how do we express it? If we don't express it, how do we keep it from harming us? So there's like two pieces to the challenge,
Right.
which is, can you stop the anger from being produced in the first place, or turn it off
Right.
quickly when it starts to build? And then the second thing is, now that you've got anger, however you got it, now what are the options for dealing with it? So I like to
Okay.
focus, most of anger management is on, okay, you got anger. Now, how can you diminish it? How can you
Correct.
take deep breaths, do relaxation, run around the block, punch a punching bag, Stuff that's
Those are the
not going to,
standard things that are
yeah,
told.
those are all to dissipate the anger
Right,
once it's built up inside you.
right.
What I like to focus on is why the hell is it building up inside of you and
Yeah,
how
so
can you stop that?
let's get to that part. So, what have you discovered are the classic reasons why somebody is so angry?
Remember, in my 20s and 30s, when I was a young guy, I had all this anger building up
Right. So
and I
you
didn't
discovered
understand.
yours.
I didn't understand how I was generating it.
Oh,
I didn't understand how my brain was directing me to look at things in such a way that would make me angry.
okay.
But it was.
Right.
It was a blind spot, and it's a blind spot for most people today.
Sure.
If you walk up to people who are angry and say, "Do you know how your brain is making you angry?" They'll go, "What are you talking about?"
Yeah, exactly.
My brain isn't making me angry. The person who did X, Y, and Z is making me angry. That's
Right,
what's making
right.
me angry.
Yeah.
So we have this false idea that anger is, I call it the 1-2 process. So
Okay.
you see somebody doing something bad that you don't like, and you feel the anger immediately,
hmm hmm
and you go, okay, one cause two. It's a
Right, exactly.
it's
And
a
we don't
direct,
see it as we have any control over it.
yeah, because we don't see the actual mechanism,
So,
or the view that we have is incomplete. In other words, we're only seeing the trigger,
and
and we're
blaming the
feel
trigger for our reaction.
exclusively, we're blaming it exclusively as if
Right.
that's the only
Exactly.
cause involved.
So, for you, when you were in your earlier years, you said you observed patients that were angry and they would have more negative outcomes in life in a variety of ways.
Yes.
How did you make the connection to the fact that you had an anger problem? I mean, you certainly saw results of anger, you said relationship wise, etc.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what was the moment for you where you realized, oh, wow, I have an anger problem and I can do something about this?
I never got a sense I could do anything about it
Oh, okay.
until I had the breakthrough in understanding how my brain was creating it.
Okay. And so the thing that caused the breakthrough was what?
It's a long story,
Okay.
but I had other experiences where I discovered that I had these invisible internal causes that my
Oh,
brain was doing
okay.
that I didn't know my brain was doing. It goes back, it starts a lot earlier. There were other
Right.
things that happened that gave me insights that I was able to draw on. One of
Okay.
them, believe it or not, had to do with me and running,
Oh, okay.
which you
Tell
wouldn't
me
think
about
would have,
that.
anything to do with
Right.
emotions or anger. So I used to hate running with a passion. Okay. I mean, I played sports and I could run in the
Yeah,
context
yeah. No, I,
of
I can totally relate to
a
this.
sport, but if you told me to go out and run a couple miles or running for
For
exercise or
fun.
enjoyment, that's like the torture.
Yeah, yeah. I get that.
And if I saw people running marathons, I'm going, these people belong in mental hospitals. Okay,
Right. Why would
something,
anyone put themselves through
there's
that? Okay.
something fundamentally wrong with. They're masochists. They enjoy
Yep.
pain. I don't know
Yep.
what,
Yep.
but
Gotcha.
this is not for me. My identity, who I am, is not a runner. Running is awful. It's painful. It's unenjoyable.
Right.
I am not a runner. For me to imagine running a marathon would be like me imagining, I could go to the moon and land on the moon. Okay.
Yep.
So one day, and there's reasons why it happened, but one day I decided I was going to see if I could change that. Could I turn my relationship to running around to where instead of hating it, I actually enjoyed it? I didn't
Okay.
think it was possible, but I wanted to see if I could.
Yep.
And so I decided I would take that on, like make myself my own laboratory. And I actually signed up to run a marathon like 5 months in the future.
Oh,
And I
wow.
knew that in order for me to do that, I would have to figure out how to make it be enjoyable. Otherwise, there's no
Right.
way I would do all that training and all that
Right.
running, which I hated.
Right.
So I created a project for myself. Okay, how can I figure out how to make running enjoyable? And the first thing I assumed was, okay, I must be somehow making it unenjoyable because there are people that
Oh,
enjoy it.
okay.
So maybe it's not
Makes
running,
sense.
maybe it's
Right.
me. Okay.
Okay.
And I don't have any idea how I'm doing that. How could I be doing that? So that was the project. Can I discover how me and my brain were
Yep.
making running a horrible experience? Because it was a horrible
Yeah, yeah.
experientially.
Yeah.
I experienced a lot of pain, muscle
Right.
aches, displeasure,
All
uncomfortableness.
the things that reinforced the belief that running was not for you.
Yeah, yeah, and that it was running's fault.
Yes, yes,
It wasn't me, it was running. Okay.
exactly.
As soon as I made that shift, what if it was me and not running? It's like the whole world changed with regard to running.
Um,
And then
okay.
eventually, as I went through this process, I eventually discovered about 30 different ways. Unconsciously, my brain would make me run in a way that it was more uncomfortable than it needed to
Huh.
be. And every time I discovered one of these patterns, I said, okay, I see how it's causing me to run in a way where my body would lean in a certain way, or I would effort more than I have to, or whatever. Oh, okay, I can see how I could correct that. I could put a fix in for that. And
Okay.
then let
So
me see
can
if
you
I can
give one
practice that.
example of that?
Yeah. So if you're running down the road
Oh,
and you see a big hill that blocks ahead of you, you got to run up this hill. Okay.
right,
You immediately start to tense up
right.
mentally.
Anticipating
Yeah.
what it's
You
going to be
anticipate.
like.
Yeah. And your assumption is I'm going to have to work a lot harder to get up this hill.
Right.
So you tighten your muscles
Yep.
in anticipation running up the hill. And then you get to the beginning of the hill, you start to run up, you start to work harder at it.
Right.
Okay.
And you feel uncomfortable.
Which makes it harder.
Yep.
But it's mental, but
Right. It's
it's
a
being
mental thing.
translated into your physical reality and your physical
Exactly.
experience. Okay. I discovered that if you're going up a hill and you keep putting one foot in front of the other without trying hard,
Oh.
you still will get up to the top of the hill eventually.
So is that kind of like a mindfulness technique where you're thinking about the steps one after the other instead of the goal to get up the hill?
That's part of it. Yeah. And I did that
Okay.
too. I realized I wasn't very mindful when I ran.
Ah,
I wasn't aware of what was going on in my body. So then I couldn't make these fine adjustments because I didn't know what I was doing that was make it worse or better.
right.
So first
Right.
I had to get myself mindful. And that's another thing our mind will do. When you start running, your mind is going to jump ahead,
Right.
maybe a block ahead, however long you're going to run.
Sure.
It wants to get it done. It wants to get it
Yeah.
finished. And it wants to get up to the lamppost that you see or the street sign or something. It jumps out of your body mentally and it goes down the road. And that takes you out of mindfulness. You're no longer appreciating each step as your foot is hitting the ground and your body is experiencing the act of running. So I retrained myself to do that more. And then when I had more awareness of my body, then I could say, well, different positions cause different things and different thoughts
Oh,
cause different positions, which cause different sensations. So it all started to make sense in a way that I never could make sense of it before because
okay.
all this internal stuff was invisible.
Right.
I
Right.
never saw it before. But I created this project to kind of flush it out
Yeah.
into the open where I could see it. And then once I saw it, I could do something about it. Well,
Well, I mean, I think,
that's kind of like what happened with anger. There was this stuff
yeah.
going on inside me that my brain was doing that I couldn't see. Once I could flush it out into the open and I saw what it was, and it really turns out to be just a couple simple filters because our brain is always filtering reality for us. We are never seeing or experiencing reality the way it actually is because we learned millions of years ago that there was just too much information coming in to our
Yeah.
senses that the brain couldn't handle it all at once. So
Right.
the brain developed these ways of filtering reality and it would
Right.
chunk it down, it would simplify it, it would cut
Right.
a lot of things out and decide what was important for us to perceive and what wasn't. And so create these big blind spots where it would shut things out and just give us what was important, it thought. And our brains have been doing that for millions of years. We have hundreds and thousands of different filters. If you got bit by a dog when you were 3 years old as a kid, you're going to have a dog filter.
Exactly. And it'll be probably a fearful dog
Yeah,
filter.
yeah. And when you see a dog, you're going to be afraid. Whereas if you didn't have that experience, you'll have a
So,
friendly dog filter.
so going back to the anger with that, one of the things I'm aware of is that what we experience in our childhood has a huge impact, right?
Yep.
So if we're growing up in a household where there's a lot of anger, then my guess is that that trains us from an early age to behave a certain way. Maybe we're so repelled by the anger that we become very passive. So, can you talk a little bit about that, like the early influences and how that plays a role?
Yeah. Well, again, anger being toxic is not just toxic for us.
Right.
It's toxic for the people around us. So as parents, our anger can be very toxic to our kids.
Absolutely.
When a parent gets angry at a kid, it's different than when you and I would get angry at each other
Yes.
as adults because we have a certain level of maturity and worldly experience
Yep.
that we know not to take it totally seriously.
Right. We don't blame ourselves entirely like a child would.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
child will take it on more personally and will
Right.
assume things that aren't really true. but they'll assume they're responsible for their parents getting angry. As an
Right.
adult, if you get angry at me, I'm not going to assume that I'm responsible. I'm more likely to assume something's wrong with you that you're angry.
Yes, exactly. That's how I do these days. When I see somebody going crazy, I'm like, whoa, what's going on for that person?
Yeah, but a kid often will just internalize it. And then also, like you say, your parents are role models. They're teaching you
Yes.
how to behave. So if
Yes.
they're in a marriage and they're getting angry at their partner all the time, that's teaching you that that's what
Yes.
marriage is about.
That's a normal way to interact. What I've noticed anyway is that there are people that have no emotional regulation whatsoever. Like something happens, and I've seen people in their 80s react as though they were a toddler.
Yeah.
A certain situation which is seemingly minor to other people, for them, it's like the world has just
Well,
exploded.
that's because they never have the realization that I had 40 years ago as to where that
Yes.
anger was coming from.
Right. Blamed it on the trigger.
Yes. They go to their grave doing that,
Yes.
okay,
Yes. Yes.
sometimes sooner than they need to. They never figure out the puzzle. All
Yeah.
right. And if you see all the puzzle pieces, several of which are invisible inside us,
Right.
but when you can see them, then A, you understand where your anger is coming from and you know most of it's unnecessary and is not helpful. And
Right.
B, you know how to intercede. You know how to control it. When you see somebody who can't control their emotions, it's not that they can't. They don't have the awareness of where it's coming, or they have a wrong awareness of where it's coming from. If they had the
Yes.
right awareness,
Yeah.
they could see it's within their control.
I'm imagining that when people come to you for
Mhm.
help, they already have the awareness that maybe it's something to do with them or not necessarily.
Usually not. They have an awareness that the anger is toxic in their lives, that it's
Okay,
causing
so they know the
problems.
anger's toxic and they want to get rid of it.
Yeah, or they suspect it might become toxic down the road and they don't
Okay.
want that to happen. And they
Gotcha.
want to not get divorced. They want to not screw up their kids. They want to
Yeah.
not lose their job. They want to not
Right.
land in a doctor's office with a stroke,
Yeah.
because maybe something happened to a friend of theirs and now they're
Right.
all jazzed up to make sure that doesn't happen to them. But they all come without the awareness of where their anger is actually coming from, with this
Right.
wrong idea that it's just the trigger and nothing
Yeah.
else. Okay.
Right.
First thing I teach them is that anger is a four-step process. It's not two
Okay.
steps.
Okay.
It's not trigger anger.
Right.
It's trigger, trigger, trigger anger.
Okay. So explain that if you would.
Okay, so the first trigger is the one that everybody sees,
Yes.
the external trigger.
Right.
Then that triggers two triggers inside us, in our brain.
Okay.
It's those two triggers in our brain that actually creates the emotion of anger.
So let's use a specific example. Let's say somebody's driving and there's a road rage scenario.
Okay,
The tail.
I'm working on a book on how to cure road rage, by the way, but go
Oh,
ahead.
are you serious?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, okay. I bet that'll be really helpful, especially for people in Massachusetts. So this person that I'm thinking of would get so annoyed with
Hmm.
drivers that they would tailgate
Yeah.
and just exacerbate a situation.
Okay. Let's draw a line there. Okay. There's
Okay.
two sides to that.
Okay.
One, they get angry, very angry.
Yes.
And then two, they manifest that anger with certain behaviors.
Correct. So let's say the first trigger is they feel like the person ahead of them is driving too slowly.
The person ahead of them may, in fact, be driving too
They
slowly.
may.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But to them, that's an offensive act.
And see, that's the thing right there.
Yeah.
Lots of people drive slowly.
Right.
It doesn't trigger everybody.
Exactly.
If it only triggers the people who have a filter in their brain that driving slowly is something bad and wrong that people shouldn't do.
Right. Okay. So trigger number one was the person's driving slowly.
The
Okay, let's
goal,
get
the
to the
goal
goal.
is to understand that whenever we're angry, there's always three filters that have been triggered in our
Oh,
brain.
okay.
Three very specific filters. Doesn't matter what you're angry about, what triggered you, whether you got angry in prehistoric times, whether you get angry 1,000 years from now.
Okay.
You're a human being, your brain has been triggered to have you see the world through three specific filters, and they're very simple. The first filter is somebody did something bad or wrong they shouldn't have done.
Okay.
That would apply to the slow driver. Okay?
Yes.
You're seeing that behavior as through a filter of it's bad and wrong and they
Right.
shouldn't be doing that. Okay.
Right.
The second filter is somebody is now negatively impacted
Mm-hmm.
by that bad behavior. Me, I'm driving now and I'm being impeded by this slow driver. I can't get where I want to go
Right.
as fast as I want to get there, or
Right.
this person is interfering with my enjoyment of driving, whatever it be.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Okay,
That's
that's
filter
number
number
two.
two. And
Yep.
then filter number three is what I call unilateral blame. So it's a very narrow, it's like we have the horse blinders on and we're focused on blame. And all we're focused on is that slow driver. And we don't see any other causes involved.
Right.
Okay?
We don't even think about the fact that maybe they're 90 years old and they're uncomfortable driving or whatever
Right,
it may be.
right.
Yeah.
I remember when I was first figuring this stuff out and working on my own anger episodes and realizing these three filters were always involved,
Right.
which I hadn't seen before. So one day I was driving on a highway and I was in the right-hand lane and somebody pulled in, off of an entrance ramp very slowly,
Yeah.
and I had to slam on my brakes to avoid hitting them. And I
Right.
started to get angry like it was my habit. And I
Yep.
would make the gestures and honk the horn and do all the stuff,
Yep.
that you do. I mean, I wasn't going to full road rage, but
Right. But you were
in the
getting there.
privacy of your own car, you can do that stuff.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm working up all the anger and everything. And then it dawned on me that, oh, I was going 80 miles an hour in the right-hand lane.
Wow.
I hadn't seen that before.
And you weren't aware of that until that moment.
Yeah, well, until I've been doing all this work to
Yes.
understand my filters clicked in,
Right.
and then to also question the validity of those filters, because they aren't
Oh,
always true, or all of
right.
them aren't always true. But
Right.
if you find that if any one of those three filters is not really true, if your brain is sending you a false narrative or a false perceptual filter, and you see through it, the anger just. So I couldn't.
Wow.
I was in the midst of working up anger at this person, and as soon as I realized, oh, I played a role in this.
Wow.
They weren't 100% responsible to blame. I was at fault too.
Yep.
And then as soon as I had that realization, I could recall times in my life where I was in their situation. I was coming onto an entrance ramp for a highway and I'm
Yep.
getting to pull on and I take a quick glance, you know how you do a real quick glance.
Yes.
And I see a car in the right-hand lane. It looks like it's pretty far away. I just slowly pull it. I didn't realize it was going 80 miles an hour and it's on top of me and honking their
Oh
horn.
gosh.
So it wasn't that I was a bad driver or an inconsistent
Right.
driver. It was just they shouldn't have been going 80 miles an hour in the right-hand lane.
Certainly not in the right-hand lane.
Okay. So that's an example of the filters making you angry, not the
Right.
situation. And a lot of times the filter can be false or partially false or missing some
Right.
important data.
Absolutely.
So another example I like to use is we've all had the experience of our anger just completely dissolving in a second when we discover that what we think is true is not really true.
Well, like what just happened to you as you were explaining in
Yeah.
that car situation.
Yeah. So we've all had the experience where we've made an arrangement with someone to meet us somewhere because to transport us to something important
Right.
to us.
Right.
And we've made sure they understood how important it was and they really have to be there on time. It's
Yes.
critical. And you're there on time and they're not there.
Right.
And 5 minutes go by and you start to get a little upset,
Yep.
Another 5 minutes go by and you're starting to think of yourself, I should have never trusted this person. They are so irresponsible. I should
Right.
have known better. I know who they are. They didn't take it seriously. They told me they would, but they lied to me. Your brain's creating this whole scenario, okay,
Right.
of all this irresponsible behavior on their part. And then they suddenly arrive and they're distraught. They're beside themselves with feeling guilty. I'm so sorry. I left a half an hour early. I was very conscientious. I really knew it was important. I got stuck in this traffic jam. I couldn't get out of it. And
Yep.
as soon as you get that information, which you were
Right.
lacking, your brain
Right.
couldn't know it because it didn't have that data. But
Right.
as soon as the person arrives and provides you with the reality of what actually happened,
Right.
and you compare that to the stories your brain made up about how they were irresponsible, they didn't leave on time, they didn't
Right.
care enough to take it seriously, all that
Right.
stuff that you
All
thought
those
was
beliefs
true.
that,
You
yeah.
thought was true, and now
Yep.
that you see it was a whole different reality, okay?
Right.
What happens to your anger the minute you realize what was true? It's gone.
Yeah.
You didn't have to punch a punching bag. You didn't have to take any
Right.
deep breath. You
Right.
just saw the situation differently and you dropped the false perceptions that you had and the anger immediately went away. Another thing I didn't realize about anger when I was in my 20s and 30s
Okay.
is how often one or more of these filters was wrong whenever I was angry.
Yeah.
I thought they were always correct. And the emotion of anger makes us feel righteous and justified in what we're seeing and the way we're seeing it. You remember in Star Trek, you could cloak the spaceship in a protective shield
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
so it can't be attacked. Well, that's what our brain does. It creates this false reality and then it
Right.
uses the emotion of anger
Yes.
to cloak it in a sense of rightness. We
And
don't
that
suspect to question that it could be wrong, you know?
correct. And so the reason that the brain does that is what? It's because it's protecting us from something
Yeah, it's
fearful.
all survival. So
Yeah.
back in the day when we first appeared,
Yep.
and again, we had all this stuff from the world coming in and we couldn't process it all. In order to stay alive in prehistoric times, you had to make
Right.
very fast decisions.
Yes.
You hear rustling in the bushes near you.
Right.
Do you run or do you stay?
Right.
Is it a threat? Not a threat.
I experienced that growing up in New York
Yeah,
City.
yeah, yes, exactly.
That's a weird looking person coming down the road. Do I
Yeah,
take off or do
yeah.
I walk
And
slowly?
you have to make these
Yes.
fast decisions. So the brain evolved to narrow things down and make it simplified. You make a quick, life-saving decision. If you misinterpret, if you thought it was a harmful animal and it's a fuzzy little rabbit, okay, but you ran anyway, you're still alive to live another day.
Right. Right.
But if
Exactly.
it
And maybe
was,
you feel foolish, but
yeah, but if it was a tiger or a lion or something and you didn't run, then you don't
yeah.
get that second opportunity. So
ex-
it was all in the service of keeping us alive to make these
Right.
quick black and white
Yes.
decisions.
That makes
That,
sense.
and to do that, you have to really condense your view of the world into very small bits of information that are, critical but
Yep.
small. So your brain developed these tendencies to make us want to be right about
Yep.
what we see and need to be right so that we can move and make decisions in life.
So when you're working with people and they come in knowing that they have an anger problem, but not necessarily having any awareness about the fact that it has a lot to do with them, how do you get them to sort of wake up and see that?
I tell you, it is not hard at all. The hardest
Really?
thing is getting them to want to figure it out. When people come to me, I can teach you the three filters in
Right.
10 minutes.
Right.
I have this 10 session program where I can teach people this whole procedure in like 10 1 hour Zoom sessions, like we're doing right
Wow.
now. Okay.
Yep. Yep.
And at the end of that 10 hours, they're like a completely different human being when it comes to
Wow.
anger and their awareness of it.
Wow.
Right. But right in the first session, before we even do anything, I say, do me a favor, go in your memory banks and come up with 5 examples in your life of any time you've ever been angry about anything. It could be
Hmm.
a big anger, a little anger, it doesn't matter. I couldn't possibly know what you're going to choose,
Right.
right? But you write down 5 things.
Okay.
And then I teach you the filters, right?
Yep.
And that takes 10 or 15 minutes or maybe a little longer to explain them to you and give you some examples. And then I say, okay, let's go back to your 5 examples, all right? And we go through each of them and say, okay,
Yes.
so give me the first one. So, oh,
Yep.
well, I got angry because my brother did X, Y, and Z. Okay.
Right.
I said, were you thinking that your brother was doing something bad, wrong that he shouldn't have done? Yes. Were you
Yes.
thinking that was causing negative impact to you or somebody else that you cared about? Yes. Were you
Yes.
thinking that your brother was completely responsible or to blame for doing the bad and wrong behavior that was causing the hurt and harm or potential hurt and harm? Yes. Okay, let's move on to number 2, okay? Because my parents scolded me when I was young. Okay, did you think that scolding you when you were young is something bad and wrong they shouldn't have done? Yes.
Right.
Were you negatively impacted by your parents scolding you and making you feel bad? Yes. Were your parents 100% responsible or blamed for scolding you and when you were angry, when you were feeling angry? Were you looking at it that way? Yes. Okay, let's go to number 3. You
Right.
go right
Same,
down the
same
list.
thing for each. Okay.
And so they get to see, oh my gosh, every time I'm angry, it's these same 3 filters. I never saw that before.
Right.
We respond the way we've been conditioned.
Ah, okay. So ultimately, though, if we become aware of that conditioning, we can
Yeah,
choose a
now we
different
have a
way to
choice.
handle it.
Now we have it. We didn't have a choice how we got triggered.
Right, right. But we
That's
have a
all.
choice once we have the awareness.
Now the question is, what are you going to do? And how much awareness are you going to bring to the party now? You know?
Right.
And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking
Yeah.
about bringing these other levels of awareness, which you now can bring.
Yes.
Okay, I got triggered. I'm angry. Now I can bring my awareness to these 3 filters. And I really recommend people write those 3 things down.
Yep.
Put it on an index card or a sticky note or in your cell phone. Somebody did something bad, wrong they shouldn't have done. Somebody was hurt and harmed, negatively impacted. And the perpetrator was 100% responsible or to blame for what they did that was bad and wrong.
Right.
That's always going to be the way your brain makes you angry. Okay.
Right.
And now you know the mechanism. Now you know what to question.
Right.
The,
And I just want to point out too that those 3 things could be true, but that doesn't guarantee that we have to be angry about it.
right. And usually 2 of them may be true, but the third one may not.
Correct.
So you have to look at each one and parse
Right.
each one really.
Right.
And sometimes you have to really dig in and get very philosophical. You have to get very
Yeah.
realistic, very
Yeah.
truthful, which is not a strength in our society today,
Yeah. Yeah.
We just go with what our brain tells us most of the time,
Right. And don't realize that we have another way to do it.
or that there are other ways of looking at things than the way our brain is telling us to look.
Correct.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. That was a breakthrough I had 40 years ago, and then I started looking at my own examples of anger because I had a
Right.
lot of them at the time, so I had a lot to practice with.
Yeah.
And every time I would get triggered, then I would say, okay, now I've got the three filters. Now let me do the work of interrogating them. And I
Yes.
would go like, oh, gee, I didn't realize that my brain made me look at it this way. But when I think
Yeah.
about it, using my own stored life wisdom, I don't think that's true.
Right. And so the way the running experience connects to this was
Yeah.
that at first you had a desire to have running not be horrible for you, not be
Yes.
painful.
Yes.
And then it sounds like, if I'm understanding you correctly, you started to have these awarenesses around how you could see the experience of running differently.
Well, I had no awareness of what was in my blind spot about running. I had this huge blind spot, which
Right.
is all the tricks my mind was playing on me to make running
Right.
unenjoyable.
So
Let me
becoming,
give you a primary example of that.
sure.
My mother was a big proponent of no pain, no gain.
Ooh, okay.
Okay.
A common one. Yes.
She transmitted that philosophy to me.
Yes.
I always assumed when it came to running, no pain, no gain.
Ah, so if it wasn't painful, then you weren't actually gaining
And you
with
weren't
that
actually
philosophy.
running.
Right.
Running had to be painful or it wasn't running.
Exactly. Or else
That's
it
how
wasn't
my
running.
brain had it wired up.
Gotcha.
Okay. So when I was in medical school, I became very sedentary, started to put on a
Oh,
little bit of weight. And every 6 months or so, I would get angry at myself and I'd say, okay, I got to lose weight. So I had a high school nearby and I would wake myself up early in the morning before I had to go off to school. And I would go to the track and I would run around the track 4 times as fast as I could, having not done any physical activity for 6 months. Okay.
okay.
And it would be painful. And I would go, okay,
Ah,
I'm running.
totally.
Pain, there must be gain.
Yep, yep. I'm gaining. Mom is right.
And then the next morning, I'd drag myself out of bed and I'd go. And now my muscles are sore, which they weren't the first
Mm,
time. And now I run the 4 times around.
yeah.
And then by day three, it's like, I don't
I don't
think
want
I'm
to
going to
do
go
this.
today.
Yeah, totally.
But my brain had given me this no pain, no gain philosophy.
Yes.
And when I decided to take this project on for myself,
Yeah.
one of the first smart things I did was I questioned that philosophy. I said, who says
Yeah.
that that's how it has to be? How about if I take all the pain out of running?
Yes.
Wouldn't that be a novel idea?
And
And that's what I did. So when
yeah.
I originally set my running program up, I didn't make it about running. I
Ah,
made it about covering a distance
okay.
because I knew that I'm training for a marathon. So
Yes.
I'm trying to
Yes.
mentally as well as physically prepare. So I said, I knew that 5 months from now, I'm going to step on a starting line and I'm going to run 26.2 miles. Okay.
Unbelievable.
All right. And
Yep.
then I'll be done. Okay. So I knew I had a distance to cover. So now every one of my training runs was a microcosm of that. Okay.
Right.
I'm going to start off with like a quarter of a mile. All right.
Yes.
My goal today is to do a quarter of a mile. That's the goal. I can do it any way I want. Okay. I can run or not run.
Oh,
I can
interesting.
start off jogging. And when I
Okay.
have the slightest bit of discomfort, I can stop and walk. Because it's
Ah,
not
as long as
about
you reach that distance. So
it,
that the
the whole
discomfort.
thing is achieve your goal,
Yeah,
make the distance
I like that.
any way you want. Take the pain and suffering out of it.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's really good.
And it worked. It was a brilliant change, but it came from challenging the belief that I had all along that I
Right.
just assumed to be true and just the way the world is. All
Yes.
right. And then I started to question it. And I said, well, who says? Does it have to be that way?
Right.
And I said, how about if I make up the rules for my running program?
Yeah.
And I'm going to design this program to take the pain out, not have the pain in. And then once I did that, I wasn't building up this pain every day that would cause me to quit the whole game. And then I never got a chance to make the discoveries that I made because I was still in the game every day.
Right.
And I was still looking forward to going out every day. And then it became like, oh, what am I going to discover today? I'm not going to
Ah,
have any pain, so I don't have to worry about that. But what am I going to discover about how to make it better, how to make it more enjoyable? And then these things started happening. I started seeing these things and they accumulated to where, and then each time I would make corrections. And that came before I handled my anger. Okay.
yes.
But that was like the breeding ground or the proving ground. So,
Yeah.
oh, identifying these invisible things my brain is doing
Right.
is valuable because it allows me to see the dynamic of what's really going on more fully so
Yep.
that I can step in and take control over the parts that I have control over
Right.
and change the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so once I handled the running thing, which took 5 months initially, then I said, well, let me see if I can do this with other problems in my life. So I turned my view into anger. What's my brain doing making me angry? And that eventually led me to the three filters.
So
And
how
then
long did that take to get through?
it probably took another 6 months or so because they didn't hit on them right away. Remember, I had to trial and error. You try to figure it
Yeah,
out, read a bunch of
sure.
stuff, try to figure out
Okay,
what.
so you were doing some research too,
Yeah,
besides just working with your own
yeah,
brain
and
and
then
thoughts.
testing them out. Can I relate it to my experience? And
Yeah.
then the next thing I tried was I had this morbid fear of public speaking.
Oh,
I would have never volunteered to do this. I would have been a basket case. Okay.
wow.
I'd always blame public speaking, like everybody else does. It's
Right.
one of the
Biggest
biggest
fear
fears and worse than death.
besides
Whatever.
death.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And I said, well, what if that's not true?
Yeah.
What if it's not public speaking? What if it's the way my brain is approaching public speaking?
Yes.
And if I can figure out how my brain's making me fearful and a basket case,
Right.
then I can undo it. Okay.
So this is a really brilliant technique that you can use for all kinds of different applications. And it can be on the personal level of being suspicious of our own thoughts to
Yes.
determine the truthfulness of those.
That's the key place we need to get to. I should really need to figure out what's off that's causing me to be angry. And so
Yes.
you lose that whole thrill of getting righteous about your anger and working up
Yes.
the anger and demonstrating it and all that kind of stuff because you go like,
Right.
ooh, there's probably a mistake behind it
Yeah.
somewhere and I'm not willing to look at it or being honest about it or whatever. It's very interesting the way that happens.
It's
It changes for
fascinating.
people.
So if somebody wants to connect with you, what's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, I think the best thing they can do is I have a handout, a PDF handout that you can download online.
Okay.
It's called the best anger elimination method you can find.
Okay.
So it gives you some more information about anger. Talks about the 10-session program that I have and
Okay.
my new book that I just released on this whole thing that we're talking about
Oh, cool.
called Dr. Orman's Life-Changing Anger Cure. And it
Awesome.
gives you the whole methodology, how to do it. You don't even need the 10-session program anymore if you get the book because you can
Oh, wow. You can just do it yourself.
do it yourself. And particularly with some of the stuff that we've been talking about today will be really helpful. Where you can get that handout is go to theangersolution.org.
Okay. I'll put the link in the notes below this podcast.
Yeah, so that'll get you the handout, and that'll also get you on my mailing list. I send out emails each week. I pick a topic, I break it into 3 parts, and send it out Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And so
Cool.
you can get on my email list. You can always unsubscribe if you don't like get the emails, but then you can also communicate with me that way. So
Awesome.
yeah,
Great.
yeah,
One last question for you.
sure.
What did I not ask you that I should have asked you?
What's like the biggest misconception that people have about anger today?
Oh, that's a good one.
And we touched on it a little bit, but I always like to highlight it, is that
Okay.
if we happen to have an anger problem,
Hmm.
we think that we're kind of stuck with it.
Ah,
And you can't really do much about it because we probably tried. Most people have probably tried. And without these insights that we've just
right.
talked about today, you're not going to get very far. You can
Right.
maybe get good at managing once you've generated the anger, but you're not going to be able to stop generating.
Yeah.
But once you understand what we've talked about today, it really opens up a whole new set of possibilities where you really can see that this whole idea that it's impossible is another false story our brain is sending us
Yes.
to keep us from questioning the hold that it has over us and our emotions,
Yeah.
because it gets us to believe all this stuff when a lot of it isn't true.
Right.
So if you're willing to dig in and question what your brain is sending you, the narratives your brain is sending you, the newsroom that you have in your own head that's sending you stories not
Yes.
just about anger or
Right.
anxiety,
About
but
all
about
kinve of stuff.
everything in your life, what you can accomplish, what you
Right.
achieve, how much value you have as a human being, are you
Mhm.
lovable, not lovable. We got all these narratives our brain keeps sending us, the majority of which aren't really based in fact, they aren't
Right.
true, but they sell it like it's true and we buy
Yep.
it like it's true and we
Yep.
make ourselves suffer unnecessarily.
Right.
You could stop all that if you
So
wanted.
I love that you can extrapolate the lessons that you're teaching around anger to all kinds of other areas of your life.
Yeah, yeah. You can even do it with food. Look at all the narratives about food that aren't true.
Oh, yes.
All the marketing,
Oh my gosh. Well, just
lobbying,
trying to pay
those stuff.
attention to the labels on anything
Even the
lost.
labels can be misleading.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So we're not getting the straight talk about even the food that we eat
exactly.
that's important. This whole discussion about our brain feeding us false narratives has implications throughout
And actually, it
our life.
fits beautifully into the work that I'm doing with my courses, because one of the aspects that I teach, what greenwashing is, which is like the labels that make it sound like it's a non-toxic, eco-friendly product, but in fact, it's not.
Yes, there you go. I mean, this trickery is all around us.
Oh, gosh, yeah.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
and again, some of it is coming from unscrupulous people who are
Right.
actually trying to trick us for profit.
For sure.
Okay, but like I said, our own brains are fully capable of tricking us just out of
Yeah.
the whole survival mechanism that developed.
Well, thank you. This has been such an interesting conversation.
Well, great, and great. Yeah, I'm happy to have had it. I hope your audience gets a lot of benefit from it. And
I hope so too. Thanks for tuning in to the Green Living Now podcast. If you're ready to detox your food and your home and make healthier choices without stress and confusion, join my free 5-day Green Living Kickstart Challenge. In just 5 days, you'll take quick, impactful steps to reduce toxins and create a cleaner, greener lifestyle. If you want to go even deeper, check out my Organic Food Blueprint course, where I uncover hidden food toxins, the industry's biggest secrets, and real strategies for living healthier without breaking the bank. So you'll learn how to decode labels, shop smarter, and ensure that your food and water are truly safe. Get started today at greenlivingnow.com. Let's create a healthier, greener world one step at a time. And until next time, stay inspired, empowered, and stay green.